All right, awesome. And we are live. Welcome to the Cool Data Project Show. I'm Kristen Kerrer. And here I interview practitioners in ML, DL, and AI about cool projects that they're working on. And today I am so excited to have Ken G with me. I'm sure you all know who he is, but just in case, Ken, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Scouts Consulting?
Yeah, absolutely. First, thank you so much for having me. I a little bit about myself. So, I am the head of data science at Scouts Consulting Group. So, there we work in sports analytics, and our main focus is helping athletes and teams improve their performance by analyzing the data that's collected on them. So, really focused on how teams win, less so on how to sell tickets or do some of those other things. I'm probably better known for the content that I produce on YouTube via my main channel, Ken
Mhm.
G, and my podcast, Ken's Nearest Neighbors, where I interview a bunch of incredible data science practitioners as well. Kristen, you've obviously been on the show there, and
Thank you
I'm
for having
super
me.
stoked to dive into some of the projects I've been working on and tell some stories around that.
Yeah, awesome. And Scott says hello. Big hello, Scott. Thank you for coming. So you talked about some of the projects that you've been working on recently. Do you want to tell us what some of those are?
Yeah, I have a couple. So in the last couple months, I've really been interested in a lot of the large language model tools. So something that I wanted to explore is how do we use these for data science and data analytics? A recent project I did is I went through one of the very basic data sets, the housing prices analysis, and I made a video essentially where I went through that and did that analysis while leveraging these tools to help me. And I sort of pair programmed with the tool in order to get a very interesting result. And I think something that's really useful is thinking about what parts of the data science lifecycle or the process are going to be essentially augmented with large language models and what parts are going to stay largely similar where the human insight is going to create the most value compared to what a ChatGPT or a Bard or a Claude is going to be helping us with. So, for example, something I found that I think really useful is that with data visualization, a lot of these tools are really helpful because they can help me spin up a basic visual. They can help me iterate on them relatively quickly. And I think for visualization, that is one of the most important things is we build something basic and we make slight tweaks to it to get it to where we want. We change like the theme, we change the color scale so they pop and they make the most sense. And we can go through using large language models to generate that code relatively fast. It also frees you up from using specific visualization frameworks. Let's say I personally like using Plotly a lot, but
Mhm.
I wanted to use a different visualization tool. I can have ChatGPT translate my Plotly code into something else, maybe because of a feature. For example, in Plotly, if I remember correctly, it's hard to get rounded corners on a bar chart. And that's something I think looks aesthetically pleasing to have. I can have ChatGPT make that tweak for me and spin it up in a completely different visualization package that I don't have to necessarily go through and learn the syntax for. So something that I've learned more recently or that I've been toying around with is how important is just general syntax compared to like the theoretical knowledge and the themes that go through all of our projects or our products that we're creating. And I'm realizing that syntax changes, eh, quite frequently in programming packages. Is it useful to learn that or have some index that I can call that up relatively quickly compared to understanding the functional elements of the programming languages that I'm using and like the higher level structure and order of it? And that's something I've been emphasizing quite a lot in the things that I'm building and in the projects and the products that I'm creating.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it has saved me so much time. And, it doesn't always work. Sometimes you have a problem, but, the times that it does work, it saves me a bunch of time. Um, One thing Ken just said, not Ken, Scott just said, Ken's audio is out of this world. Would you mind sharing with us what microphone you're using? Do you know?
Yeah, I'm. Using the Shure, I think it's the MV7. Uh, it's my go-to podcast mic. Uh,
Okay.
highly recommend. A little pricey for entry-level user, but considering I have a podcast and I love doing things like this, I found the investment was worth it.
All right, perfect. And then do you have a link for the housing project that you did? Do you have a video for that?
Uh,
Or
yes, I do. Let me find it. It's on my YouTube channel.
yeah, you don't even need to pull it up now, but if we could link that later in the comments, that'd be awesome.
Absolutely. Well, I already have it up. I can share that with you in the private chat, and then we can do with it whatever we would like later.
Okay, perfect. And so have you been using ChatGPT to help you with large language model projects as well, or have you mostly been applying it to your housing project and other similar types of data projects?
I'm using both. So I really like the basic projects. I know this might sound like heresy to a lot of people. I like Titanic, I like Penguins, I like Mints, I like the housing prices data set because they're such valuable places to learn and workshop new skills. And I don't think all projects have to be focused on getting a job or being put in your portfolio. A lot of projects can be useful to just help you acquire skills.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the cool things about these basic projects is there's so many different people that have done work on these projects that you can see how many different people would take on a problem or a challenge like this. And you can compare how you would approach it to how they approach it and iterate on that and essentially gain a lot of knowledge. I, on the other hand, when I'm doing projects that I like to share or that would look good in a portfolio, I have been doing quite a bit with large language models. I really have enjoyed working with langchain recently.
Yep.
That's a project.
LinkedIn's amazing. Mm-hmm.
It's so sick. So for those that aren't familiar, essentially, and I stole this definition from my friend Greg Camrad, who's made a lot of incredible langchain content on YouTube. But essentially, langchain is a tool that makes large language models accessible to the current data that you have on hand, and it makes you able to take these large language models and make them into products that are useful to people. So something I've been thinking a lot about, especially as it relates to large language models and using ChatGPT and some of these things, is I actually am moving away from projects and I'm working more on creating products. So it's easier than ever now to create something that other people can use. And that is what I think the difference between a project and a product is. A project is, oh, I'm entertaining uh, my own curiosities and I'm building this thing for me to learn and understand. A product inherently has end users that could be you. I could be an end user of a product,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a little bit more targeted to be used by other people. And so I've been obsessed with LangChain because it takes, GPT 3.5, GPT 4, Claude, any of these things, and it makes it accessible in a product format, which I really like. One of the projects I'm working on right now, and I've got a pretty good working prototype, is I took all of my YouTube transcripts and my podcast transcripts, and I essentially used LangChain and some of the information in there to create embeddings on all of the content. And
Mm-hmm.
now anyone, when this video comes out, can ask a question, and it'll pull the most similar content that I've made over the course of my entire content career, and it'll pull that out, and it goes through a GPT layer
Mm-hmm.
that turns that into a cohesive answer. So you can say, how do I learn data science? It'll pull from all my content and it'll give you a response based on what I've said in the past. Fortunately, it'll also provide links. So it'll show you the videos that I've made historically around that exact topic. So this solves a really cool problem. And that's why I believe it is a product, is because I get a lot of comments on YouTube and I could sit there spending 30 minutes responding to a comment, but instead I can use this platform or this tool that I'd create to be able to respond to a comment with a really good detail from past information that I've created rather than having to go research this again and give a good answer. I also, when I get comments, I'm like, I know I have a video on that. but I don't know what video it is. And this solves that problem where it pulls the videos that are the most relevant to serve up to people. So I've been really excited about that as well. I mean, there's so many incredible opportunities to use particularly langchain, and maybe langchain isn't the specific tool that'll be the future that'll break it all open, but it is definitely one right now that is making a lot of large language models unbelievably accessible to people to make platforms, products, tools, any of these things.
I mean, the thing that's mind-blowing about langchain to me is that, you ask it a question, and as long as you have the tools, you have the math tool imported, the Wikipedia tool imported, and it just makes the decision of what element, which tool it needs to use first, and then what sequence to answer your question. And that's absolutely mind-blowing to me. And what's also mind-blowing to me is how much analytics has changed in the last couple years, right? Like 2 years ago, we weren't having this discussion, and now all of a sudden you're talking about video transcripts. And I played with 12 Labs, which is semantic video search. And so right from Colab, I'm uploading my own videos and then doing like statistical topic modeling on top of it. And it's like, these types of things we were not thinking about playing with at all. And just like you said, that it's like things are becoming accessible. Like, I'm not a software engineer, I'm a data scientist. And, the fact that I can like go and just play with these things and get like meaningful output. Because, just like you, I'm a big fan of products. Like, I have the bus detector running in my house. I love using, not necessarily like the Titanic or, other popular data sets, but I love just taking my own data. Like, I will use a camera and grab frames and make a project out of that. And maybe, there's, the bus is a use case that like doesn't really extend to other people because the bus has to go by my house and back. Or then I did like medication adherence, and it was over engineered, and you do it with sensors. If you were really going to do that project, it's a product. It's not like a product you'd take to market, but it is something that is usable. And that's also like a big thing that we've seen in the last couple of years. A couple of years ago, you were doing a project, you get your analysis output, and you're like, that's my project. Whereas now we're able to build things where you're doing some really cool stuff. Where did you get your YouTube transcripts from? Is that something that you can just download from YouTube, or
there's
did
a
you
langchain
programmatically do
integration.
anything to get it, or what?
There's a langchain integration that allows you to pull them. And I essentially use the YouTube API to get all of my YouTube videos, and then through the langchain integration, I pull that. I'm planning to go back through and use, it's called DeepGram. It's a transcription service that also will do the timestamps. And so in theory, I'll be able to pull specific segments from videos rather than just give the whole video. Honestly, that might not be as good for my watch time or anything like that, because that is an important part of YouTube. Like, a cool part of this project is it helps people watch more of my content, which is always, well, I think, a good thing. I don't want to waste their time though, so there's some like balance between those things. I do want to double click on something you said, because this is an overarching, I think, philosophical change that's taking over the field. I mean, you talked about how much it's changing, and I think projects, products, all these things are inverting a little bit. So we used to have a traditional data science workflow would be a company would hire a bunch of data scientists. They would build the models in-house. You would use those models for a specific purpose, and then you'd maintain those models, retrain, do all this stuff around them. And I think that it is starting to shift, and it's going to start shifting a lot more towards us outsourcing a lot of the models. You look at anything related to text, it's essentially being outsourced to some form of, like GPT-3, GPT-4, or any of these other models that are out there, and you're building infrastructure on top of something you don't even own. And to me, that is a colossal shift in how data teams, organizations do business, right? The role of data scientists, I don't think it's going away, but it's inherently going to change about creating infrastructure to use things that you haven't built that are more generalized. Of course, there'll always be use cases to build something in-house, a specific thing for your business, but I see there being more and more companies using outsourced models, but also companies starting that are completely built around outsourced models. And to me, that is a very interesting space. And I think that's why learning tools like langchain, or not just learning the tool, but understanding how the infrastructure works. How do you make something that is more generalized, specific to your use case, but leveraging all the, millions and millions of dollars someone else spent in training this model to your
Mhm.
advantage? And realizing that, oh, I don't necessarily have to do the maintenance and upkeep and infrastructure that I used to, in the same way. Like, yes, you'll have to maintain the infrastructure around what you're building in house to make that third party model useful, but that's a different structure than maintaining all of the models that you've trained in production, making sure they're producing good results, they're not doing anything. And we face a different problem set, which is the hallucinations and these types of things. So
Mhm.
it's exciting to me and also scary that the field is changing in this way, and we have a tremendous amount of new opportunities to build products, but we also have this different problem set than what we had before. And I guess we have both problems now, because we'll always still have these models that you're building in house and you'll have to maintain them and whatever. But it's just this new avenue that's opening up that that creates so many opportunities to create valuable products for people. It's very, very exciting to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it is really like an age-old problem though, right? Because 10 years ago, it was still, do I, with software, build this in-house and potentially
Goodbye.
take on a lot of tech debt, or do I, get it from someplace else and use it? And we're just like getting that to the next, it's like the next level. And I think there are ways in which, right, the barrier to entry for a data scientist gets a little bit, I mean, so now you're like required to know about way more tools than you had to know about before. But at the same time, like you said, you're not like actually building that model. You're able to like build on top of that model. Okay, we're going to take this language model and we're going to make sure that it works for like, the compliance issues, and regulations in our industry. And so it's different. But I assume, right, because there's still the people who are building those models that'll just be sort of like more small and niche. And then, I've just always found that no matter what it is that comes down the pike, if you're, using a new tool in analytics, it often just opens you up to work on higher value questions. And that's, here we're able to leverage this model that somebody already spent millions of dollars to train, and now we get to build on top of it and use it and really focus on the business problems. And one thing that I always think is interesting that I really like getting other people's opinions on, right? Because like as some of these things are becoming more accessible to everyone, and data scientists are learning more tools across the pipeline, like, do you think that data scientists are eventually going to be, back in the day you'd build a model and then you'd hand it over to BI and they'd productionalize it? Do you think that data scientists are going to start to be responsible for like more of the pipeline, or in other ways things are also getting more complicated, right? And it's difficult to speak because there's just such a variety in the maturity of data across the field. But like, what
Companies,
are
yeah.
your thoughts on that?
I actually think it's going to be the opposite. I mean, we
Mhm.
already see a trend in the industry towards more specialization. I'm doing analysis for another project actually, where I'm looking at job posting data in the space. I'm going to try and do an industry report on sort of the state of data science, because a lot of people are pretty concerned about the field. Is the job market is supposedly fairly tough right now. There's a lot of things going on, but one thing I've noticed is that data engineers, there are significantly more job postings for data engineers than data scientists, data analysts, any of these other roles, right?
Yeah, that
And
blew up.
historically, many people would consider some of data engineering under the scope of data science. If we go back 5 years, a lot of data scientists were doing at least some data engineering work.
I had to set up a schema and yep.
Yeah. And so I think that a lot of the work is being uh, more specialized. I mean, you have machine learning engineers, I think you have data scientists, you have data analysts, you have BI engineers, you have business analysts, you have analytics engineers now. And that is hopefully giving a little bit more clarity about the expectations around all the roles. I think data scientists, the role specifically, I think the work of data science will always be valuable and around. I think the role of data science will have to have some form of identity crisis to figure out what specifically it is, because I think right now it is a little bit too broad. And I
Mhm.
think maybe at smaller companies, data scientists make a ton of sense because they're doing a lot more things. In larger companies, I think more specialized roles are going to be increasingly prevalent over time. And you talked about learning more tools and skills in this new world. I think that's an inevitability, but I really am focusing, and this is coming full circle on the tutorial that I made using, for example, ChatGPT. I am heavily indexed on trying to learn meta skills. So a
Mhm.
meta skill would be um, like learning how to pick up a programming language or a new package really quickly, understanding the fundamentals of those things so I can adopt that relatively quickly. And, I can work with langchain after a week of seeing it for the first time, something along those lines. Not master it, but be able to use it and understand it and adapt to it.
Speak
And I
about it.
think, exactly, I think uh, large language models are going to be a foundation for that. So understanding how to prompt, understanding how to use these things and get the most out of them, to me, is one of the most valuable skill sets that we could have. Because if we really think about it, using ChatGPT, it makes us, in some sense, language agnostic. I can take Python code and have it write it in JavaScript. Yes, I have to do some debugging. Yes, it's not going to be perfect, but for a very basic use case, for me to understand what's happening, for me to get a grasp of creating something that's usable by another person, that meets the the strategic minimum for using another language. Same thing with using another tool. I mean, one of the challenges with ChatGPT is that the documentation doesn't go up to, for example, even when LangChain came out. But there are other tools, there's other ways to use that to learn new packages, to integrate new packages. I mean, you can, for example, with Claude, because the context window is so much bigger, you could paste in essentially all of the documentation for LangChain and query it and ask it to create some of the infrastructure for you. So I think that that skill set of being able to generalize and become language and platform agnostic through these large language models and being able to leverage them and understand how to do that with them is one of the most valuable things that people can be doing right now, because it makes you a generalist without having to be a generalist. And
Mhm.
I think that is so cool. um, I'm sure that will get a reasonable amount of pushback, but honestly, that's the writing I'm seeing on the wall.
Mhm.
Um, and as you had mentioned before, there's always going to be uh, a lumpiness to the data science space, where some companies are cutting edge, they're going to value the skill set. Other companies are going to say, we have private information, we don't even want you to use large language models. But I'd probably want to be on the side of the companies that are embracing that skill set, because I think they're also going to innovate faster than a lot of the other ones. So I will get off my soapbox now.
No, no. You said a lot of really interesting things. One of, when you brought up like the idea of the data science role and how are they going to fit. I had actually interviewed for a analytics engineer role in 2015. So that title is not completely new to me, but is there a chance with all these titles coming off and stuff that like the term data scientist may just go away? Maybe it's just data engineers, analytics engineers, analysts, and machine learning engineers. Um, just so prior to the term data scientist becoming a thing, like I was an analyst and I still built models. They weren't used for production. It was, well, I guess in some cases it was like if I did a k-means behavioral customer segmentation or whatever, I'm writing that data back to the database. but it wasn't like nothing sexy. I wasn't doing like recommendation engines or anything like that. Um, but it almost sounds like we could just revert back to, pre 2015 when we just called people analysts, and they built models, but they were for research. And if you built models for production, maybe you're a machine learning engineer. I don't
Yeah,
know.
well, let's look at some data. I have Google Trends pulled up. Let's see if I can look at like the last 3 years.
Oh, you can share that too.
Yes. It looks like, well, that's 90 days. Maybe the last 5 years would be more useful. No, I mean, we're still seeing an interest in the data science keyword term. I don't know if that
Mhm.
really means anything necessarily, but I, I, I think it's a possibility that essentially the data science role goes out of vogue. Again, the work will not be going out of vogue. I want to be very clear about that. The
Oh,
work
yeah.
you do as a data scientist will be integral in organizations, at least in my mind, for the foreseeable future.
Mhm.
But the specific title of data science, it kind of hurts data scientists because it's relatively vague. So I think one of the reasons why data engineer has become very popular, one is because the work is desperately needed in a lot of organizations where they try to do data science and they realize, oh, we don't have proper data infrastructure for this.
Yeah.
Like
It's
that
going
is
to
one
be
reason. But
digestible by analytics.
exactly. But the other reason is the data engineering role is significantly more finite than the data science role. You understand what the expectations are. You could probably explain data engineering work better than you could explain data science work
Hmm.
because it is like it's fundamentally more
The
concrete.
scope
The
is different.
outcome
Yeah.
exactly. The outcome of a data engineering project is also more concrete than the outcome of data science work, right? That to me is one of the biggest challenges is, oh, am I going to be doing like research? Am I going to be doing analysis where I give someone a recommendation and they just ignore it? Am I going to be building a model that's going into production and that's being productized and used? Am I just going to be like upkeeping this model? Like
Hmm.
what is my role as a data scientist is so broad that that creates arguably more challenges than it than we benefit from. Um, and so I think for companies, there's an incentive to be more specific with the naming conventions and provide more clarity because that's better for hiring. That's better for a whole mess of different things. Um, do I think the market will necessarily follow that trend? I probably not because like overarchingly, like all companies aren't necessarily thinking about these problems in the depth that we are. They're like, oh, we need this skill set. What do you call that? Oh, it's a data scientist. We'll put out a job posting. So uh, that's probably my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, that was great. And so these different projects that you've been building, do you have like a specific, has there been like a specific motivation behind those or?
That's a really good question. So, yes, I like to build projects or products, either one, because that is for me the single best way to learn a new skill set, to push
Mhm.
myself, to be able to interpret and use a lot of these new tools that are out there. So, let's go back to that initial project that I was doing where I was just doing the housing prices data set. I've done that analysis on my own before, but I used that project to be able to improve my prompting skill set with ChatGPT. So I was able to figure out, okay, what works great for me when I'm coding using this again as like a pair programmer. How do I interface with this tool? And so it wasn't about learning necessarily new data science skills for me with that project. It was about learning prompting skills and learning how I could integrate this with my work. Some of the other projects, it's like, oh, I want to learn langchain. I also have, I think, a really good use case that creates value for me and also creates really good value for my community. It's solving this specific problem that I have. And so I love projects and products because they solve multiple problems in one fell swoop. So I get learning out of it. I get something that now other people can use and learn from. So some might say that, Ken, you didn't create a product out of your last video, your tutorial video on the housing prices. And I would say, actually, I made a video about it that can help other people learn uh, from that method. So it is, in a sense, a product. Like, a product can be very broadly defined. Um, but I get multiple benefits out of doing these things. And in the long run, hey, maybe I could turn that YouTube comment thing into even a business or something that is profitable in the long run. I mean, not the intention of doing any of these things, but projects, products, they all have essentially unlimited upside if we really think about it. So you get the learning, you get uh, value created for some other people, and in the long term, there is potentially financial upside if you're like, well, this is creating value for other people, enough value that a sponsor will pay for it, or even other people will pay for it because the value trade off is so good for them. So it's pretty hard for me to make an argument for not doing any projects or products, especially if you're in a space where your job is to build things and to love that process.
No, and I love that too, because when I think back, how much time have I spent looking for a data set and Googling, like, where can I find the best data sets? And I'm looking on Kaggle and I'm looking in a bunch of different places trying to find something relevant. Whereas, like, I could just choose a data set and go. Something though. So MT asked, not having tried langchain at all yet, how hard is it to use technically? How easy is it to get started? So I know on my YouTube channel, I set up a langchain chatbot with like Wikipedia. And so, and if you go to my YouTube, or I could put a link in the comments or whatever, I have like a demo tutorial there that'll take you through and get you all set up. Ken, do you have anything?
I'll be coming out with that LangChain video hopefully like by the end of the month. Um, really, I would check out Kristen's. That sounds like an awesome resource. As I mentioned, my friend Greg has it's like a 20 video series on a bunch of the different use cases for LangChain. Uh, that like between those two resources, I think it's pretty. You can get something working in like 10 minutes. Let me put it that way. I find
It was an
LangChain is
afternoon and I was like ready to record.
yeah, that's how I view it. It's a lot of it's just infrastructure to make large language models useful to you. And so the way I view it is, I can attach my data to a GPT model or any of these types of things. It's very accessible, I think, for someone that has basic Python programming.
Mm-hmm. No, totally. And yes, Albert, agree. Recommendation engines are sexy. um, so in going back and evaluating these data sets again and looking at these, like, you know, projects through a new lens, has there been anything interesting about like the methodology or the algorithms or different considerations going back through again, or?
Yes, actually. The
Mm-hmm.
biggest thing that I've learned from reevaluating what people would consider beginner projects is that there's so many different ways that you could take a project. I remember when I was first starting, I was doing the Titanic or I was doing any of these things. I thought that there was essentially a right answer.
Got
There
it.
was a
Yeah.
couple different algorithms you could do. And now when I look at it with fresh eyes, I see so many infinite possibilities of feature engineering, of different algorithms, of different approaches that I could take. Even I built a pipeline for the train test split for the housing prices thing. And that's not something I would have ever considered when I was first starting out. But it makes it easier to essentially change features or update the model or make adjustments to what I was doing. And that's part of a project too. There's infinite ways you can engineer things. And honestly, going back, that was kind of scary because I was like, wow, there's so many different ways that I could take this. None of them are necessarily wrong or right. That's a little bit overwhelming. And I kind of looked back and was like, wow, that it was kind of enjoyable to have this linear view of the world when I was doing it the first time, because I would run, a linear regression, and I'd be really excited about it. And I wouldn't have to worry about cleaning or scaling the data or normalizing variables, any of these types of things. But now the world has opened up to me, and I see so many different things. But at the same time, that's part of the enjoyment of the process, is you get to choose your own adventure now so much more than I was able to do before, because my adventure and my understanding of the space was so small. I remember I had this very vivid memory recently where I was trying to do my first project. I was trying to predict fantasy sports outcomes, and I didn't know what a model was. I didn't know what that meant. I heard people building models all the time, but what does that mean? What is the input? What is the output? How do I get to a place where it, for example, projects fantasy points? How do I get data into any of that format? How do I do any of these things? And that was a very different feeling than what I have now. Then it was, I'm overwhelmed by all of the stuff that I don't know, and now I'm a little bit overwhelmed by all the stuff that I do know, because when I approach these things, there's so many potential opportunities, so many ways I could take this. And that's not really a problem, because you eventually just get started, you build some infrastructure, and you should do planning before you start any of these projects. But it's really interesting to see that change in myself that I progressed through. Um, and everyone can see that if they revisit a project, which you probably should do, because you can see how far you've grown, which is a very valuable skill set.
No, I really identify with that. And even, in work, not really knowing how to approach things, or having my like set of tools and going for it. And I think that that's great because, nowadays having more options, and that's exciting, and there's so much available to us. But 10 years ago, I that would have given me anxiety. Like, that was what I could handle at the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
um So, how exactly have you been leveraging ChatGPT for the projects? You're getting code, you're getting ideas on how to proceed?
So I think people can use ChatGPT for a whole host of things depending on where you are in your journey. And I really view ChatGPT, especially for people in the early stages of data science, as the single best learning platform that's out there. So you essentially have a private tutor that's reasonably good, that can answer any of the specific questions you have about an analysis. Like, I did this before the code interpreter was out there, but I still think it's applicable now. So something I do is I would essentially upload the data and say, "Hey, this is what I'm trying to predict. What questions would you ask of this data?" And that helps me to prompt information that I might not have seen. So it's easy to say, "Hey, ChatGPT, what should I know?" It's a lot more meaningful if you have ChatGPT ask you questions, or ask questions of the data itself. That's one of my favorite use
Mhm.
cases, is getting ChatGPT. So ask me 10 questions about this data set that would help you frame an analysis. So I usually go through that approach. I can say, "Hey, create me a do some basic exploratory data analysis of this project," and then create some boilerplate code for you to work with. The cool thing here is that this is all iterative. So I can say, "Oh, I want a core plot of these specific things, change the plot in this specific way. Okay, I want to understand uh, how these two different graphs look, make some box plots, or whatever it might be associated with the variables." Instead of me having to code that and remember all the syntax, I can just spit it out, which is very important for me. I think, especially with exploratory data analysis, that information is for me to get an understanding of the data. It's not necessarily for me to show to other people. Like, yes, I might show some of it, but if I can do that process quicker, more efficiently, and by asking questions rather than having to write all the code to see all the visuals, that is a massive win because it helps me to get the table stakes for the analysis so much faster. I can get an understanding of essentially all of the variables. I can get an understanding of their relationships, and that helps me start asking even better questions of the data as we go forward. So again, the biggest use case for me is in data visualization. That to me, I can spin up so many so quickly uh, that I can create my foundational knowledge and start moving on. I also am using ChatGPT a lot for model training. That to me, creating relevant like grid search and parameter grids, it's a lot easier and sort of, uh, I think a lot of people would agree, a more mindless part of the data science process now.
Mhm.
uh, I think the specific optimization of parameters and model selection is something that is fairly automatable in the fat part of the distribution of data science. If you're maybe a Kaggle grandmaster and you're competing in competitions, probably going to be doing something a little different.
Or you're like
But
solving cancer. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. But for most data scientists, I think that that part of the process is something that will can either be automated or can be recycled or whatever it might be. Um, the part that I found ChatGPT not to be as helpful was with the feature engineering. So and also building the pipelines for the analysis. I think that there's a slight lack of understanding of context in the data a lot of the time, and building infrastructure is not something that I think ChatGPT is really strong at right now. So there's this whole like data engineering and feature creation part where I think that there's still a ton of um, human like magic. And then at the end of the process, productionization and these types of things where you kind of have to leverage other tools rather than just code that ChatGPT can't really help with either. So, like, maybe yes, it can write some Streamlit code that's pretty decent,
Mhm.
but if you're going to put something through another platform, if you're going to make it an API endpoint in, I don't know, like in AWS or wherever you might be hosting it, it's kind of limited because it doesn't have insight into the other tools that you're necessarily using. So, just picking and choosing the parts of the process that I think the ChatGPT or another large language model could be useful is something that uh, I found a lot of success with.
No, and that was a great point that you made about like telling ChatGPT about the features and getting back questions to ask. Like you could look like a rock star as an analyst. Just, I mean, because I know for myself, yeah, I try and be thorough, but there's always a chance that I could hear from ChatGPT of some like great question to ask that I didn't think of on my own. Um, and the barrier, like it just only takes a couple seconds to ask. And you get the information back so concise that it's just so worth it to explore all those avenues.
Yeah. Well, so to that point, something I've learned about myself is that I get the greatest insight through conversation. So it's
Mhm.
not even necessarily what the other person says. Me articulating my thoughts and describing them to another person, it spurs insight within myself. And it's even better, it's multiplied when another person is saying smart things because that gives me more of the puzzle to work with. That helps, uh, you know, expand my understanding of a subject area. So rather than having a person around all the time, I can be articulating that to ChatGPT, and that is improving my overall like logic process to get to my end goal because I have something that can give me feedback that I can have a dialogue with.
Mhm.
And I would imagine most people are not necessarily like that, but there's also the paradigm of having a rubber duck for software engineers at your desk to talk to, and that's worked for probably the last 30, 40 years. So
Monica just right there. Two
exactly. And
seconds
so
before you said it, she was on it.
yeah. Well, so to me, that is ChatGPT is serving the same purpose, but with actual feedback. It's like a rubber duck on steroids.
No, I do. I can see how it'll improve my communication because I'm writing a prompt, and if I get a response that wasn't what I was looking for, it was like, well, how can I more clearly communicate what I was looking for to get that? And yeah, it causes me to grow as a result, and think about how I'm saying different things. And that's going to carry on to when I go to actually talk to real humans too, right? Like you're actually developing a skill.
Yes, one of the most important skills, in my opinion. I mean, the further I get in my career, the more that I feel the need to index on interpersonal communication, the more I feel the need to index on storytelling and being able to, in some sense, sell the ideas that I have.
Mhm.
It's a lot easier to sell an idea or a project or product if it's good and if it's tangible and if someone can use it. And that's one of the reasons why I've been making this push towards products over time, is because people conceptually understand a product that they can use and that they can put in their hands. It's a lot harder for people to conceptualize an analysis, which I think is has been a big light bulb moment for me in especially the last couple years.
Mm. Yeah, no. And so if somebody was looking to get started who was brand new, just, looking to start with machine learning or to get into data, how would you tell them to go about that? Or what type of resources would you want to point them to?
Yeah, I mean, I always there's two main ones. One is new, obviously, which would be ChatGPT.
Mm.
I so I actually have I hope it's all right. I have a course that I made with Tina Huang. It's not out or anything,
Oh,
but
yeah, go
y-
ahead, pitch
okay,
that.
okay. Well, it hopefully it'll be coming out eventually, but the real focus on it is how to learn effectively with ChatGPT. And there's a couple really unique ways that you can prompt it so that it acts as a tutor or it gives you feedback rather than giving you the whole answer. So you
Mhm,
can put in these prompts that are very that are focused on helping you as like the best possible teacher you could get. The teaches with a Socratic method of asking questions and doesn't just give you the answer. I think that that's, if you're learning, one of the pitfalls of ChatGPT is because it just tells you what you want, and it might not always tell you the right thing. But so that's a really important thing. The other is Kaggle. I mean, having data, having projects, being able to work on things is really important. I think that a lot of people really focus on learning the fundamentals and the theory and all those types of things. And I am a practitioner first of the practitioner or practice first philosophy that, let's say we're learning statistics. I think it would be a lot easier personally to learn statistics if I knew how to code, because I could implement all of the things via code and see how they work. I could tinker with them, I could make tweaks, I could explore. And exploration for me is a huge part of learning. But it's also a little bit scary if you don't know where you're going and you don't have a place to ask questions. And that's where ChatGPT can really come in well. So I always recommend people the ChatGPT, Kaggle micro courses. I have a ton of content on YouTube that I've produced. I also have courses and stuff, but they're a little bit more aimed at like an intermediate practitioner who's already learned Python and hasn't gone there. But a third thing I would learn, especially if you're doing Python, is I would recommend people to figure out how to use Streamlit pretty early in their career,
yeah.
because that to me, one, it's super easy. You can essentially, for any data visualization you create, you can make it into a web front end, and that makes it so you can share anything you're working on so much easier than before, and you can share it with non-technical people. That to
Mhm.
me is a very valuable thing. Like if I sent some random person a Jupyter notebook, if I sent my girlfriend a Jupyter notebook, she'd be like, what the hell is this? Like, why are you sending me this? If I sent her a dashboard that she could click around, and I mean most people can interpret the graphs and things, that is a completely different transformative experience for me sharing my work with another person, getting feedback, getting any of these types of things. So I know I beat around the bush, but ChatGPT, Kaggle, or basic straightforward courses, and like front end creation, I think that those are things that will set people up for a tremendous amount of success learning.
Completely agree, especially on the, so I've played with Streamlit and Gradio a little bit, but most of the dashboards that I've built have been in Shiny. And I just can't tell you how many times I'm like talking to, especially when I was like working by myself, doing contract work. There's just always a use case for a dashboard. And now, I'm sure like the type of stuff that you're talking about when you're playing with these and you want to just be able to show it literally a couple of lines in Streamlit and you have a dashboard, and you can't discount the fact that it's going to look impressive to if you are interviewing with marketing people or teams that are like non-technical. They don't realize that it was like 6 lines ago to
Yeah.
get that up there. But yeah, no, and just tinkering with all the things for sure.
Well, yeah, I will also say, there's Shiny for Python now as well. So if you're coming
I
from
heard about
R and
that.
yours and you really like that infrastructure, that's also a good resource. You said something that I absolutely love is, if you're not even interviewing for data science positions, if you're interviewing for something outside of that realm, coding is looked at like a superpower. Even like Excel commands that are crazy, people are completely blown away with. So if you're in a marketing interview, even if you're in, for example, a business intelligence interview where you're showcasing, maybe you've used BI tools, but you can show that you can code as well. People's eyes sort of light up. Or I remember in grad school, I did one business degree and then my computer science degree. There were kids that were doing like VBA and Excel, and I remember explicitly myself thinking, "Oh my god, that's so cool! I could never do that. That's crazy." And then now I look back and I think, okay, well, I can actually write in real programming languages and whatnot. But at the time, if that's outside your realm of expertise, I mean, think even in finance, if you're working in a more traditional role, but you have this coding skill set, it's not just that it creates value for you in your work because you can do things more efficiently or in different ways. It's also looked at upon in a very different way. It's very impressive to people that cannot code. And you lose touch of that when you're working in one of these domains where there's such a premium and everyone can do it.
Mhm, mhm. No, totally. And so we're getting to the end now, but if somebody wanted to find and follow you, where should they go?
Yeah, so I'm accessible on LinkedIn, just my
Yeah.
name Kenji. On YouTube, Kenji as well. I try my best to respond to all of my YouTube comments, or as many as I can. That's probably the best place to reach out for comment or advice or anything along those lines. My podcast, Ken's Nearest Neighbors. And then, I'm available on Twitter and Instagram as Kenji_DS. And then, I write on Medium and all this. Probably too many platforms, but remember, YouTube is probably the most relevant. LinkedIn is also relevant, but I'm pretty backed up on LinkedIn messages, so I'm not very good at responding there. If you comment on one of my LinkedIn posts, it's actually probably a better way to get a hold of me than the chat ecosystem on LinkedIn, which I think is not very good or efficient. So
Mhm.
uh so yeah, I think that is my whole self plug spiel.
All right, awesome. So everyone, make sure you go and follow and find Ken. And thank you so much for coming to chat with me today. I really enjoyed our discussion and all the cool things that are going on with langchain and ChatGPT and all the cool work you were doing. I just like really enjoyed chatting with you.
I did as well. Thank you so much for having me. This was an absolute blast.
All right, have a nice day, guys.
Bye everyone. Thank you for tuning in.